Fable, what a joke. Not the game. That would require there to be a game, something finished, something you can actually hold up and judge like a normal human being. No, I mean the fog around it. The flop sweat around it. The whole desperate carnival stink hanging over this reboot, like somebody sprayed corporate deodorant on a grave. Because every time Fable shows up now, it is never normal. It is never, hey, look at Albion, look at the monsters, look at the dumb little choices that turn your hero into a saint, a freak, or a tax-paying disaster. No, it is delay whispers, panic energy, ugly reveals, fake whimsy, and that haunted press tour smile that says, please clap, we exhumed the brand. How do you spend all this time dragging back a franchise people actually liked, and still make the reveal feel like an apology letter with particle effects? Easy. You bleach the soul out of it. You hand the corpse a press kit. Then you stand there blinking, when the audience notices the body is not breathing, and do not hit me with the defense squad script. Nobody has played it yet. Yes, brilliant observation. That is the problem. Nobody has played it yet. Which means the only thing people have is what you decided to show. And what did they pick? A stupidly charming quest where a man turns into a chicken because you picked the funny dialogue option. No, they picked caution. They picked managed tone. They picked marketing that feels like it was sanded smooth by anxious producers, one HR consultant, and a legal department trained to smell joy before it spreads. You do not watch this and feel anticipation. You watch it and feel strain. It feels like a company trying to land a plane with one engine on fire, while the cabin crew keeps reminding you that complimentary peanuts are still available. Then there are the delay rumors. Officially, sure, they can say 2026. But the second somebody says maybe this slides into early 2027, nobody reacts with shock. Everybody just nods. Because this project radiates fear. It radiates the energy of people who know one more weird trailer could turn the entire conversation into a landfill. And then you remember GTA 6 is out there like a meteor with voice acting, and suddenly the panic makes perfect sense. The hero of Oakvale has become the hero of administrative leave. The chosen one now wields the ancient power of please check back later. If the game never comes out, it cannot flop in public. That is not release planning. That is a hostage negotiation with a calendar. Now let us get to the face. The one that turned a game reveal into a week-long argument about whether modern AAA studios have developed a medical allergy to charm. And no, I am not buying the lazy defense that people only reacted because a woman existed on screen. That excuse is stupid. People reacted because the design felt aggressively bland. Bland on purpose, flattened, smooth, processed. It has that ugly prestige content look, where beauty is treated like a political liability, and personality is treated like an unsafe workplace condition. It does not look like a fairy tale hero. It looks like a compliance-approved protagonist built to survive think pieces. That is why people bounced off it. Not because it was different. Because it felt designed by people who are suspicious of delight. And that is where the old games start winning by a mile, before the new one has even taken its shoes off. Classic Fable had a face. It had weird little goblin smiles, smug guards, ugly villagers, crooked features, strange proportions, and that slightly dirty storybook look that made Albion feel like a place where everybody had bad opinions and excellent side quests. It was stylized. It was theatrical. It had flavor. The old version did not look embarrassed to exist. It was not begging to be approved. It was trying to be memorable. The old games were not trying to lecture anyone. They were trying to amuse you, annoy you, tempt you, and occasionally turn you into a horned freak, because you thought kicking chickens was a lifestyle. The new version feels intentionally bland, intentionally uglified, intentionally filed down, so no one can accuse it of being too much of anything. That is a hostage haircut, and once you catch that smell, you start seeing it everywhere. It is the philosophy leaking through the drywall. Everything feels ideologically managed. Everything feels focus grouped by people who wear lanyards even at home. Like somebody rebuilt this series backwards from a policy deck, then stapled Albion on top after lunch. This feels like a correction project. It feels like talentless hacks inherited something with an audience, looked at that audience like it was a fungus problem, and decided the real mission was fixing the franchise for people who never cared in the first place. Then the loyal fans noticed the contempt marinated into every choice, and suddenly they are supposed to feel guilty for recognizing the recipe. Then they rip out the morality system, which is not some tiny adjustment. That was one of the bones. Halo and horns. Good and evil. Your character changing in loud, stupid, dramatic ways depending on how much of a saner nightmare you decided to become. Was it subtle? No. Good? It was not supposed to be subtle. The whole point was that your behavior left a mark so obvious, even a drunk villager could point at you and go, yeah, that one definitely eats children or donates to hospitals, hard to say which. It made your choices visible. It made morality theatrical. It made the world react like your nonsense had weight. You were not just told that you had become a monster. You started looking like one. And now the reboot strolls in with morality is nuanced now, which sounds smart until you realize it is just cowardice wearing glasses. Every time a developer says morality is nuanced now, what they mean is we got scared of making ugliness look ugly. So now it is reputation. The old system said, act like a monster, and you start wearing monster energy on your face. The new one says, well, perception is layered, context matters, community response is fluid. Great, it sounds like a consultancy report stapled to a sword. Fable did not need to become a TED Talk with chickens. It needed symbols. It needed vulgarity. It needed the confidence to say yes, if you behave like a nightmare in a fairy tale. The fairy tale should slap a nightmare label on your forehead. Then Microsoft hands this thing to Playground Games, which is still one of the funniest decisions anybody has made with a straight face. Not because Playground is untalented. They are talented at cars, landscapes, and reflections. But who looked at that studio and said, yes, these are the people to revive one of Xbox's weirdest fantasy RPGs, a series built on satire, class jokes, moral stupidity, black comedy, and fairy tale cruelty. Fable is not Forza with mushrooms. Rendering grass beautifully does not mean you understand Albion. Making a sports car look expensive in motion does not mean you know how to write a world full of liars, frauds, peasants, heroes, and charming degenerates. One skill set is polish. The other is personality. So far they have shown the first one in high resolution, and left the second one locked in a cupboard. And the marketing keeps making it worse. Every time they try to be funny, it gets worse. Those little humorous clips, that desperate quirk, that squatter's bit, all of it lands with the exact thud of a youth pastor trying stand up. Old Fable humor had teeth. It was mean in a playful way. It felt like the world was mocking you, not pitching itself to you. The new stuff feels like corporate whimsy in a fake beard. The kind of weird that has already been checked for risk, and fitted with safety rails before being released into the public. That is not humor. That is product behavior wearing a jester hat, and asking whether the joke tested well in key regions. And look at what people are actually arguing about. Nobody is losing sleep over the combat loop. Nobody is writing sonnets about the spell system. Nobody is already obsessed with the towns, the monsters, the jobs, the quests, the actual adventure. A healthy reboot gets people talking about what they want to do in the game. This one gets people stuck in a swamp of aesthetics, politics, messaging, and damage control. That does not happen by accident. That happens when the reveal itself tells the audience that optics matter more than fantasy. Once that happens, everything becomes evidence. Every awkward line, every weird face, every smug clip, every sterile joke, every silence from the studio, it all feeds the same story, and the story is simple. These people do not trust the old magic, so they replaced it with crap. That is why the anti-woke rid keeps landing, whether the defenders like it or not. Fable always had variety. Nobody needed a sermon about that. The problem is the feeling. Players know the difference between a world built by writers and a product arranged by managers. One feels alive. The other feels laminated. One invites you in. The other corrects your posture before you sit down. That is what this reboot keeps radiating. Modern audience energy. The mythical audience executives keep chasing, forever convinced that if they flatten one more beloved thing into a safer, cleaner, more self-conscious shape, a giant invisible crowd will finally appear and buy 5 million copies out of gratitude. That audience does not save franchises. The loyal fans bought the originals. The tourists do not build legacies. So now Fable sits in the stupidest possible position, too distrustful of its old fanbase to win them back, too processed to seduce anyone new, and too awkward to stop becoming a meme every time it opens its mouth. And that is the punchline. Fable is now more famous for the argument around it than for anything inside it. The whole project feels like a beloved franchise handed to spiteful people who distrust beauty, fear clarity, resent old loyalists, and think sanding every hard edge off a fantasy world counts as progress. Fable should have kicked open the tavern door, mocked your haircut, handed you a rusty sword, and dared you to become a monster. Instead it shuffled in wearing a visitor badge, carrying a mission statement, and asking whether it was still allowed to exist. That is not a comeback. That is surrender with expensive lighting.